Hello and welcome back on BMI, Bicara Minggu Ini, and I'm your host, Norman Go. Coming up next on special series in Bicara Minggu Ini, I talk to a good friend of mine who has been in this industry for almost a decade, in both print and digital newsrooms. She's a feisty person. She can be as loud as a compelling stories, and on the ground, she's the big sister with a big heart, and we can always count on. However, it's not always a meadow of sunflowers for a lot of female journalists carrying stories on the ground, even in Malaysia. So in this episode, I will go in depth and talk about hazards at work, her stories and experiences of our fellow female colleagues carrying out their duties in reporting. I'm honored to have Yiswaree Palansamy, journalist with Malay Mail Online, speaking to us on Bicara Minggu Ini's Malaysian Women in Journalism. Welcome to the show, Yes?
Thank you very much for having me, Norman. It's a pleasure.
And can you tell us your story when you first started as a journalist? Your first byline. What year was it when you first started? We don't talk about your age, but your 1 decade. I think almost 1 decade, right?
It's 13 years already, actually. Slightly more than a decade, yes.
13 years. Do you remember the first time when you walk into the newsroom? How was it? When you walk into the newsroom, do you see a lot of female journalists in the newsroom?
Well, when I took my first step into journalism, I started out as a rookie, we call it stringer, freelancer. I started out in Johor when I was studying. I was doing journalism, and there was one day when I was at the Deepavali Bazaar just going about my thing, and the editor himself, the bureau chief, and it was Sheridan Mahavira at that time, who's with the Malaysian Inside now. He came down because he had to do the stories himself because they didn't have enough staff. So he was there interviewing me when I was getting my henna done, and I told him I'm a journalism student. He gave me his card, and the rest is history. I became a stringer, and after I graduated, I got offered to join the NST, the New Straits Times. So I moved from Johor, and everything else is history.
It's definitely not easy for a lot of journalists, irrespective of whether you are a guy or a girl, to move from your hometown, out of your comfort zone to work in KL. Of course, even for myself, coming from Kuching, sometimes small towns, you don't get really good stories. Yeah, you do have a lot of stories, but sometimes the baptism of fire must come in KL. That's where a lot of things
This is where
going
everything
on.
happens, yes, because this is the hub of the scene and the chaos and the ruckus and the colors and everything. But my time in Johor was not, I would say the baptism of fire started then, because my editor, my boss, Sheridan, was very strict. He instilled a lot of values in me, things that you don't learn in textbook. You see, journalism is a very practical career. What you learn in books is just a guidance, but how you employ what you learn and how you are and how you survive in the field, it's really up to your grit. You really need to be very gung-ho to make it, because it's not all rosy, and I dare say it's not rosy every other day too. So yeah.
And knowing you for a couple of years, I think when I first got back from Singapore, I came from a very, very different background. I don't have a journalism background, but I've been writing since. Sheridan was the one who interviewed me when not for work at that time, and I was still a blogger when I was in Kuching, and he was the one who called me up for the 2011 state election, and I gave my opinion on that. And I think it was also 2013's general election. Mm-hmm. It was Sheridan again. See, cross paths.
Yeah, Sheridan is like the big brother for quite a number of us. So yes.
So when it comes to stories on politics, yes, you are known in this area. You get your scoops, and we are always jealous with you. How do you get
Not always. Gachi does a lot too.
We compete too, eh?
Yes, we were.
All these stories on politics, crime, and social issues, over the past 13 years, how has it shaped your perspective in telling your stories through your lenses? When you talk about lenses, not necessarily through photos. Sometimes your writings tells a lot from there. How does it affect you?
You see, whatever you do as a journalist, you should always set aside your ideologies. you may have a certain ideology, a certain standing, a certain belief, but you should not you should not channel that into your stories, because you should be the one on the objective side. You should look at both sides, or 3 or 4 sides, or how many sides there is to a story. There are many sides to a story. You should evaluate all of it objectively and tell the story as it is with facts. So of course, I don't get personal with my stories, but the subject matter of my stories, the interviewees, some of them I have forged a long-lasting friendship with, because their stories were just beyond, So as much as I loved telling their stories, we also became friends. But the most important thing is, in political stories, since that was what you questioned me about, you should, like I said, you should be objective, because it is always someone's mileage which they are trying to pursue through the media. We are a very convenient platform for many people to pursue their agenda, so we should always be alert, and we should not stray from our journalistic ethics. So yes.
Of course, we won't talk about what's going on these days.
Yes, it's too much of a drama.
It's too much of drama, and again, the drama continues today.
Yes.
As the TV host journalist defended what she said on TV against another organization. Well, let's look past of that, and then we'll come to that. We'll talk about hazards at work. We don't usually talk about this, and I hear your personal stories when you were covering protests.
Yes.
People don't really talk about are we looking after the welfare of our friends on the ground. How has it been over years for you as a female journalist, looking at how the policies of the newsrooms, looking after the welfare and safety of our female journalists, has it improved? What do the newsrooms do to improve the policies to take care of the welfare of female journalists and journalists as a whole? Let's look about the hazards at work. What have you seen so far?
Okay, so I'll start with what happened with me. And I'm pretty sure everybody, female journalists or male journalists, female journalists mostly, they go through this a lot. When we are so engaged, we are so exhilarated, we are so focused on chasing the stories that we really we really feel strongly about issues of safety and charity and whatnot. It often goes through the back door, because it often goes out of the window. Back doors are very popular term these days. We throw it out of the window, personally me, because I am very much fixated on getting that story, so I put that behind. But during one of the protests, it was when things got a little real, because, tensions were running high, political champions from both sides were high on their agenda, and journalists, many of us actually became a victim of the situation where, I was harassed and almost assaulted as well, sexually. And it's not a topic that I love to talk about, but then we have to. You see, because when you disregard your safety and you put your story and your work first, some things that happen you do not notice. And in my case, it was just happening right in front of me. I was even chased, and I was really very lucky at that time, because I had my male journalist friends around, and I immediately told them about it, and they all just formed a ring around me, a human ring around me, to prevent the guy from, getting access to me. And it was Zikri from Malaysia Kini. Zikri was really made sure that he was there behind me until, we went to a safer place. So I am really very it momentarily it affected me in a sense where I was not able to do my job, because I could not report on what was happening. I updated my office what happened, and my bosses, of course my immediate bosses, their reaction was get to safety. So safety was, of course, the utmost importance when you're covering protests and riots like this, because there will be people who come in there with a different kind of agenda, people who probably know you and who do not like what you've been writing, and then these kind of platforms serve as a very easy way for them to, vent out their frustration or their anger. When there's so much of crowd, how are you going to tell? So yeah, that was something which actually which I was a little shaken, but I picked myself up immediately, because you see, I come from where I grew up, where I come from, it was rough. So I'm used to being faced with this kind of incidents, sans sexual harassment. But where I came from, it was tough, and we all fought our way through to come where we are today. So I do believe that as much as anything is worth, female journalists, we do have our worth, and you must give us the avenue to perform, to work, and yes, of course, our safety must be taken care of too, because oftentimes some people look at us as assets, because maybe some of us, we're pretty, we're nice to look at, and it becomes a very convenient means for some to use female journalists to get things. So yeah.
Have you experienced becoming a target of attack, whether it's online or physical, because of your skin color, because of your race, because of your religion? Do you experience such when you were working
I
here?
did. In fact, of course, the attacks were not physical, but my physical attributes did, was made a point with labels such as kicap, or
Even body shaming, right?
yeah, body shaming, like and then the most convenient thing is calling Indians kicap and all that, and I'm pretty sure where from that comes. So only, I think it was just about 2 months ago or 3, was it, because of a question that I asked our health director general, Dr. Noor Hisham, during a press conference about the idea to send students back to their hometowns, and how practical is it, So so there's this political troll linked to a certain leader who thought it was very convenient to make a joke, or make me a target of slander and whatnot. But I confronted him on his platform. Of course, people like this, they don't think. They talk from here and probably from their butts. Sorry, Norman, you may censor that if you want.
No, there's no censor in this, and because people don't think, and sometimes when they speak, they sounded and smell like
because
fart.
they want to pursue a certain agenda. So it becomes very convenient. The first thing they attack is the certain people's race, religion, skin color. It's very convenient because, these are very personal attributes, and it can break a certain people. So, but for me, I'm used to this, because like I told you, where I grew up, being called keling and kicap is something. Keling is usually a very normal thing, so we were used to it. Of course we fight, and now for me, more towards educating, of course you tell them off, I'm sorry, but then sometimes it's not all about being politically correct. You just have to tell them, or show them why this is wrong. So I have been on the receiving end many times. I've gotten like messages of threat into my Facebook inbox because of certain stories. So it is all in a day's work, really. So
Well, speaking on that, when any journalist like yourself, when you receive such harassment and threats, do you lodge any complaints or even police report in fear of your safety and things like that? Any actions taken on that?
okay, to be very honest, the one that happened during the protest in Padang Merbu, I found out that the guy was actually mentally not normal.
Mentally unsound, right?
Yes, and I also think he is just overall he's not like us. So I find that it is just a waste of time, because he probably got overwhelmed in the whole situation as well. So I didn't want to pursue it that way. I mean, he did get into trouble later for another issue, but I guess he learned, because it's sad, because sometimes people like him, they are made a scapegoat for other people who are pursuing their agenda. He's used as a shield. So I hope it doesn't happen again with him. Kesian lah.
It comes to, there when you were talking about that, something that went through my head is that, a lot of people unknowingly being weaponized on social media and manipulated to attack on innocent people. So I come to this, one of the paper that I was reading over the past few days. It's a paper on women journalists and online harassment, published by the Center of Media Engagement from University of Texas in Austin. So it's a story about, it's a study about women journalists facing the threat of online harassment. And today we will be seeing things, horrible things, where crazy netizens are doxing journalists, male or female. But there's no safe. This endangers the safety of our journalists. They are supposed to report without fear or favor. So what we can find out from, just to share you what I've read from here, the results is that most of the female journalists that they interviewed 75 of them based in Germany, in India, and UK, and US. They interviewed them and experienced negative audience feedback from the readers beyond mere critiques of their work. Instead, often took the form of harassment, targeting them personally with a focus on gender and sexuality. Exactly like what we have mentioned earlier. Second part, it says, the journalists that they interviewed in India, UK, and US felt strong pressure to engage online, so they often felt they had no choice but to face the harassment. Thirdly, German-speaking journalists in the sample reported the less pressure to engage, while journalists in Taiwan often did not see interacting with the audience as important part of their jobs. Do you engage with your readers?
On some occasions, yes. But I try not to, because you see, when readers leave emotionally charged comments on, say, the Malay Mail Facebook comment section and whatnot, when someone is emotionally charged that way, you cannot talk sense into them. Because they are probably aligned to side A, side B, side C, side D, or whatever side they choose to be on. So, but it's interesting to note the anger, the type of arguments that they put forward to. Some do not have merit one bit, but others are more intelligent. So, I do take time to read the comments. But really, like what the journalists in Taiwan felt, I do not feel a need to engage them directly, because if they would like to engage me, they can always contact me through email. They can reach out to me via email or Facebook Messenger. But Facebook Messenger is not a platform where I always use to check, because of some of the messages that come in, which are more like from trolls and whatnot. So yeah, I keep to what I do. I stay professional. But I personally and professionally, I do not see a need that, I must engage this reader because of certain things that he said. It also depends on my time, actually, So, yeah.
Yeah, the other things that was the findings from this study is that some had developed newsrooms has developed specific strategies for preventing harassment, including limiting what words could be typed on their Facebook pages and being more careful to include variety of voices in the story to head off the abuse. And another one is other women reported feeling tension over harassment, but they opted to ignore the abuse or refrain from engaging on social media as a result. So similarly to what you say in this part, and online harassment has become a normal part of the job. So is looking at the legal aspects of it, everyone, you are free to speak. There's a freedom of speech. However, to a point of abuse and harassment towards other, especially journalists, it is unacceptable.
Which is why there's no absolute freedom, you see, in whatever you do. You just have to always bear in mind that there are limits that you should not cross. So, yeah.
When it comes to standing up to bullies, bullying our fellow colleagues in reporting on the ground, and those who try to intimidate female journalists from doing the job on the ground, what has been your experience in that?
You mean as in helping them?
Helping them, it can be walking straight in front of you. I say, I don't like you, calling you kitchap and all that. How has it been your experience in standing up to this kind of bullies when we see junior journalists getting the brunt of all this kind of thing? Although sometimes stories are not written by them.
Yeah.
It just happens so.
You take the brunt of it because of the publication you're with.
Yes. Yeah. So what do you think about it? What do you say about that?
You mean how I stand up to them? You see, often we must remember that these people are able to say these things because they get to hide behind their laptops, or their computers, can hide behind your keyboards and type. Oftentimes, if you were to, and if you have the opportunity to see them in person, they're not going to say those things because you have been unmasked. When you're unmasked, they know they cannot say certain things and they're going to get into trouble. I mean, you stay behind your laptops and your keyboards and whatnot, and you still get into trouble because the police and the authorities can track you. So whenever any journalists, female or male alike, they come and tell me they have faced this and all, I mean, of course, I give them moral support and encouragement. And oftentimes I tell them to not engage these people because the real reason they are doing that is to break you. And when your focus is no longer there, you feel troubled. That is what they want. So if we give in to the troll, then we would be losing the fight. I really genuinely feel we should have harsher laws against cyberbullying. We should have longer jail term. We should have, most importantly, community service. Perhaps they can join like an internship program with the media, and we can actually teach them, what they can do, cannot do, and what is it that we do in our daily jobs so they understand. I realize that our Asian community, they are much more prone when it comes to cyberbullying. It's just like, they just want to say something and they can hide behind and say all sorts of derogatory terms. So I really feel there should be harsher laws against cyberbullying. We have seen people losing their lives over it. So what have we got to wait for? How long more?
I remember the cyberbullying towards teenagers, secondary school students.
Yes.
She eventually, unfortunately, she committed suicide.
Yeah.
And of course, we won't talk further about how news like that.
Yes.
Remember, all of us were outraged at some news organizations publishing the body or even a news as the main picture. So I bring to you this one story where in Singapore, a 34-year-old man charged over racially offensive tweets.
Was hiding behind a profile of a Chinese lady, yes.
Yeah,
and you do know we have a lot of those cases here, right?
Oh, yes.
Where you read their comments and you just know it is not an Indian man or a Chinese woman or a Malay,
Yeah, and behind this Sharon Liu, his name is Zainal Abidin. See what happens? Now, the best thing is sometimes there are trolls out there. You know what's the best thing you can do? Mute them.
Because with internet, it's convenient to mask your identity online. So you can do all sorts of harassment. The internet, as much as it's a very good place to learn, it is also an extremely dangerous place. People have died because of it, because some masked people say things to them, unkind things. So, yeah.
Just now you talked about, the lessons learned and all that, the strength of the camaraderie between journalists. You talk about Yiswaree. What do you say about the current situation of our journalists itself, the fraternity itself, friendship within this community? It's small, and journalists are often being bullied first.
Yes, I have to say this point blank. Sometimes the bullying comes from our own industry members. I do not want to get personal or name anyone because it's just pointless, but I am pretty sure you've heard of some people who we've been talking when we go for certain assignments. We have this otai culture, which is toxic to me, because you see, it can be translated as a good or toxic thing depending on how these otais are towards much younger journalists, than them. But oftentimes some use it as a tool to just hurt journalists behind them and then, just listen to them or follow their lead. And that's almost like a cult. And I do not know why some do it. It's just pointless. Probably they feel inferior. I remember seeing some journalists smile and, laugh together when our Gachi was called names in parliament, by some politician. And that was very, very unbecoming. Of course, I'm not asking everyone to be up in arms and go punch anyone, but it just says a lot that, sometimes I feel our political ideologies is what makes us like that. Probably, you support him or you don't, but you are a journalist end of the day. So our fraternity is of course I do have personal friendships with many people. They are nice who have helped me and I have helped them, and our friendship is just strong because we know each other for a very long time. We've helped each other, but I really do feel that our fraternity is not as strong as it should be. It could be better, it can be better, and we need to, for that to happen, we need to stop this bullying within our circle. This otai thing, and sidelining certain journalists because they are not aligned with your gang and whatnot. It's just funny because we should be more objective, and when we indulge in things like this, it is just unbecoming. So yeah, this should stop, and then we can forge better, better friendship, professional friendship actually, so our industry would be stronger.
This reminds me of, that sort of cold treatment to journalists even for asking too much questions.
Yes.
Now that happens, or because we are doing our job, we are asking questions because...
That's our job.
Exactly. But I don't understand why some journalists get angry and they just cut you off by saying thank you. That really...
That is very rude.
Exactly.
And I've of course told off some people to not do that, because you are not the one asking questions. You see, we journalists are asking questions. I'm sorry to say, but sometimes this comes from the, some videographers, they just chime in and go, oh, okay, terima kasih. You see, that's just not right. Because I might have a very burning question which I chose to ask last, so that my other friends and colleagues can ask their questions first. And then, you wait for the last, and then you go with a bang because it might be a very controversial question. So I keep it first until, that means we have this camaraderie where we already engage with each other, like you ask first. That's what I do. I'm pretty sure you know that, when we go, we'll be like, hey, you have this to ask? Okay, why not you go first? I'll ask this. So that way we cover all our grounds. So for them to do that is actually not professional. I have to be very upfront about this. It's not professional, and you may cause the journalists to not be able to ask their questions. So I've always had this one stand: to ask is my duty, to cringe or to cripple, that's your job. But my job is to ask, and I need to get the story told to my readers.
This also tells me a lot when I was on the ground, and we see that when you ask questions, compelling questions like that, everyone gets the headline.
Yeah.
So
that is true.
What's wrong with that?
So everybody gets a fair share of it, isn't it? So why do that? And I've seen how some actually, go behind and bitch and say, oh, what? Yeah, so much. I know some are just genuinely being funny, but others actually mean it. But who's forcing you to write the stories? I'm just doing my job. We all stick to our jobs. So you see, it is oftentimes, Norman, this is just a lot of politics. Like I said, the otai culture, which is very toxic.
The politics within.
The politics within the
and
group.
We do have a lot of dinosaurs in our newsrooms, and that is really tough. Final words from Yiswaree to our listeners and a lot of aspiring young journalists who want to be like you.
Oh, be like me.
Yeah, like you, be like Gachi. People like, I remember this scene. I remember from how Gachi asked that question to Tun Mahathir, and Tun Mahathir responded to her as that you asked too many questions. In my opinion, there is no too many questions, because our job
I've gotten that from him too. You ask too much.
So what do you say is?
Well, there's no too much for a journalist, There's no too much or how much. You just keep going. And also, to those budding journalists out there, you don't get to be Christian Amanpour overnight. So when you come into the industry, you should just skim off all the attitudes. Because if you have attitudes, you're not going to go far. You need to be humble. You need to learn. Because it is about how you become a responsible journalist to continue the tradition of, all of us in this industry. We've all, we worked hard to make a name for ourselves. So there is no overnight sensation, So it's always being humble that pays off. So, and you have to constantly work towards getting your stories, chasing deadlines. That's usual. But this is not a profession where you can be an overnight millionaire, and that's one of the first things my bosses told me when I joined the New Straits Times. You have the passion, you have the drive, you go far in this industry, but of course, no attitude, be humble, and you will go far.
That is one of the best way to end our discussions today. And thank you, yes.
Thank you, Norman.
Yeah, speaking out and stating out the truth, reporting without fear or favor. That's what I describe about yes.
It is tough, I must tell you. You see, it is tough. I mean, let's not hide anything. The political climate and whatnot. It would be tough, but you stick to your guts, and most importantly, you must always be objective. Do not get the politics into your head, and that's going to be a problem when you report. So yeah.
That sums up our episode with Yiswaree Palansamy, journalist with Malay Mail Online. In our Malaysian Women in Journalism series entitled Hazards at Work, Her Story. You're listening to Bicara Minggu Ini, uncovering current affairs and politics. And you can listen to the stories and interviews on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and iTunes. For more updates and stories, if you have any suggestions, you can tweet to me at I'm Nongo. Thank you and have a pleasant weekend ahead.